target audience was students. And so with that disclaimer, I think we are ready to begin. So I'm going to share screen. Let's see here. Select the screen to share. Not sure why it's not showing up, Hunter.
Are you seeing it near the leave button? But don't click the leave button, please.
The what?
You should see that share content.
Oh, yeah, I see the share tray.
Okay.
And it says allow Microsoft Teams to share your screen. Oh, I see it. Never mind. Dr. Jennings strikes again. That's what my wife says when I do stupid stuff. Here we go. All right. Sorry about that. All right. So the title of this presentation was Scientific Communication 101, Preparing Informative Abstracts and Professional Presentations. And the reason I chose this title is that we all prepare abstracts and titles and presentations. They're not always as informative as they could be. And so today's session is aimed at improving the information content contained in our titles, abstracts, and presentations. So the outline for our talk today, we're going to talk a little bit about titles, their importance, and some useful features of effective titles. We're going to do the same for abstracts, except we're going to add some ideas about how an abstract should be organized, as well as show you some examples of abstracts that are well organized and ones that I think are effective and others are informative and others that are less informative. We're also I'm supposed to fix that and didn't, dagnabbit. We're also going to talk about strategies for writing abstracts. And then finally, we're going to have a wrap up with considerations for how you prepare a presentation, as well as some rules of the road for actually preparing the presentation. So without further ado, what's a title? In its simplest form, a title is a simple description of the contents of the paper. So you wouldn't think that that's that earth-shattering, right? It's the contents of the paper. So why is a title that important? All right, I'm asking questions rhetorically because I understand that you're not going to respond. But here, let me explain to you why a title is important. A few days ago, I typed in Google Scholar, fish conservation in Georgia, USA. And there was just a lot of 256,000 results, a whole bunch of results. Now, obviously, you probably can't scan all of that or read all of that literature, so you have to find some way to evaluate which of these papers are relevant to your interest and your objectives and find a way to parse them. So how do you evaluate all of these? Well, you scan the titles, and if the title is relevant, you keep it, right? And if the title is not relevant, you discard it. So right away, your title is your entree onto a potential reader. And so by default, your title is the most widely read part of your paper. Sometimes the title is the only part of your paper that gets read, because if the title isn't appropriate to the search the person is conducting, then they don't look at the abstract and certainly won't look at the paper. Right? So they use this title to decide, yes, I want the paper, no, I don't want the paper, Maybe it's a maybe pile over here, or I don't know. All right, so your
Cecil,
title,
Dr.
yes,
Jennings, hate to interrupt. If you are showing the slideshow on your screen,
yeah,
if you're showing the title slide number 4, we're not able to see that. So what I would recommend is just share your screen instead of the window.
okay,
Sorry about that.
okay. So
Well, now we're able to see it advancing to title 6, but it was on your introduction slide. But if you want to, if you are planning to present it in presentation mode, then I think your best option is going to be to share the screen instead of the.
okay, so let me go back to this and stop sharing and share desktop window. So should I start all the way over? I mean, I don't know what you guys were seeing.
Oh no, I would pick up where you left off. It was share
Okay.
screen and then start presentation. Just pick up where you left off.
Okay, so share and allow. So are you able to see that now
Yes.
in presentation mode?
Yes.
All right. So as I was saying, the title is the most widely read part of the paper. People decide yes, no, maybe, don't know. And so an effective title might be the only chance you get to recruit a potential reader to your paper. And ultimately, you wrote the paper because you have information that you want to share. And if they don't read your paper, you're not sharing the information. And so that's why the title is so important. All right, so what makes a title a good title? All right, there are good titles and bad titles. A good title accurately reflects the contents of the paper. As I'm sure all of you, if you've done any literature searches, you will see a paper that looks interesting, and you go and you read the abstract, and the title has nothing to do with what the abstract actually is talking about. So you want your title to accurately reflect the contents of the paper. So if you're talking about an assemblage, assemblage in the right field, don't mention species in the title because that's misleading to a potential reader. And if they're interested in assemblages, they might skip over your paper because you're talking about a single species in that assemblage. Good titles are short. Short meaning 15 to 18 words. And the way you achieve brevity in your title is to avoid a lot of waste words. And waste words are just words that occupy space, but they don't have any information content. They don't share any new information. So let's take a hypothetical title here, a study on the dietary habits of squirrels on UGA campus. Well, at first blush, that seems okay, right? It's a pretty standard title. But if we look at it a little closer, a study of the doesn't have any information content in it. And those words are taken away from our word count. So if we get rid of those, we're left with dietary habits of squirrel on UGA campus. So we've gotten rid of 4 words and we've not lost any content. But there's some information lacking here because UGA has many campuses. All right, so if we add the location of this study, where the study took place, we'll add a little bit more information that's accurate to the title. So we'll end up with the title that says the dietary habits of squirrels on UGA campus in Athens, Georgia. And I think you would agree that this title is shorter than the original draft, but it contains more information than the original draft. Okay, so good titles are short and avoid waste words. Other waste words include an investigation of, analysis of, and there's sort of a lot of preamble words, I call them, that they don't really add any content, but they sort of lead into the title. And we should avoid those because we don't get anything for them. All right, this is a big one, faulty syntax. And so oftentimes you see grammatical mistakes in titles, and we want to avoid that. So if we take this hypothetical title, Food Habits of Migrating Salmon Using Fish Ladders in Washington State, USA, we would reasonably assume that the salmon were the ones using the fish ladder. Here they are making their way upstream, and we can surmise from the title that the biologists are wanting to know what the fish are eating when they're transiting these fish ladders. All right, so by extension now, we go to measuring the home range of white-tailed deer using radio telemetry. Well, if we follow the same logic pattern, then we might believe that the white-tailed deer were the ones using the telemetry equipment. But in fact, they are not. The biologists are using the telemetry equipment to monitor or study the home range of white-tailed deer. So this grammatically is called a misplaced modifier because it's putting the modifier in the wrong place relative to where the action is going on. All right, so we see that very, very commonly. And that's a grammatical error, and we should try to avoid those grammatical errors in our titles. So based on this, use of radio telemetry to measure the home range of white-tailed deer would be a more grammatically correct answer, and there's no ambiguity about who is doing what to whom. Okay, so be mindful of faulty syntax, specifically misplaced modifiers in your titles. All right, a good title presents specific information. So again, here's another hypothetical title, effects of toxic metals on fish. And again, at first blush, it seems okay, but there's some obvious questions. What kind of metals, what kind of fish, what kind of effects are you talking about? So we could conclude that this title is too general. So how would we fix that? We would fix that by adding some specific information, like the type of toxicity test. Is it chronic or is it acute? What kind of metals, how many, what life stage we're talking about, and what species of fish we're talking about. So if we could add that information to the title we had previously, we will end up with chronic toxicity of cadmium, copper, and zinc on larval bluegill. Right, so I think you would agree that there's much more information contained in this title than the previous one that was too general. Good titles also contain keywords that aid in database searches. And so I know you're saying, well, why would I need to include keywords in the title? Because the abstract usually allows 4 to 6 keywords in the abstract. Well, that's true. But when you use Google Scholar, Google Scholar is also looking for keywords in your title, not just in the keywords list in the abstract. So by including keywords in the title, you have more opportunities for hits on your search and potential for reaching a wider readership. So you might ask, well, what kind of keywords would you add in the title that would be different from the keywords that you have in the abstract? Well, they could include things like the habitat. Are you working in a river, a reservoir, an estuary, coral reef? What species are you working on? Geography, is it tied to the mountains? Is it tied to the shoreline? Is it tied to the west coast or the mountains? Or you're doing some kind of analysis. You're doing fatty acid profiles or stable isotopes or otolith microchemistry or whatever. There are all sorts of, these are all places where you can add things to your title that would be keywords that a potential reader might lock on to get, to identify your paper as having potential interest to them. So you should include keywords in your title as well. Good titles are free of abbreviations, they're free of jargon, and they're free of formula. So what does that look like? Well, the problem is that abbreviations are not standard, and the title doesn't allow us an opportunity to define that abbreviation. So most of us would probably recognize DO as dissolved oxygen, but DLG-OGN is just as valid an abbreviation for dissolved oxygen. We just need to define it somewhere. But the problem is you can't define it in the title, and so your potential reader might be lost as to what that means, right? So try to avoid abbreviations. Formula are non-starter because the terms in the formula are undefined. I'm hoping at this point Hunter recognizes this formula because it's one that he and I put together a couple of years ago, where I was on the cusp of retirement and we were talking about whether I should work part-time in retirement or not and the value of part-time work. You remember this, Hunter?
Absolutely. I'm honored to see it.
So perhaps I'll share this with our audience. So L here is defined as the longevity in retirement, and longevity in retirement is defined by some as yet undefined retirement quotient multiplied by the number of hours of part-time work you have, which is raised to the power of the number of grandchildren you have, multiplied by how many hours you spend taking care of said grandchildren. There's a positive term for fishing, how much fishing you get to do while you're retired. And we figured out we needed a penalty term for sitting and watching TV on the couch all day. So that's why that's a cube term function as a penalty, right? So if we put this in our title and we can't define all of that in the title, nobody knows what we're talking about, right? So for that reason, you shouldn't have formula in titles. The other issue is jargon. So if I say fat cap or burnt ends or a bark or smoke ring or the snake method, unless you're a barbecue aficionado, you have no idea what I'm talking about. And if you use very special jargon, you lose your wider audience because they're lost. They have no idea what you're talking about. So when you include abbreviations, when you include formula, and when you include jargon, you leave your potential readers going, what are they talking about? I don't know what this is. I have too many titles to screen through, and I don't have time to go look at the paper to figure out what all of this means. So this one is a no. Okay. So in summary, good titles are concise, they contain good grammar, they share specific information about the work, and they contain keywords that aid in database searches. And of course, you'd expect the opposite to be true. For not so good titles, they're verbose, they have grammatical errors, they're vague, and they're rife with jargon that nobody understands. Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about. Consider those attributes positive when you're preparing your titles. Okay, so this intermission is just a transition slide to go from titles to abstracts. So keep your questions if you have them or comments. It will be, I'll ask for feedback at the end. So we're going to go on to abstract. So why is an abstract necessary? Okay, so I will point to you with the previous session where we talk about the value of a good title. Well, something similar happens with abstracts. So if somebody got past your title, the title was of interest to them, and they want to scan your paper for the main idea, they don't want to read the whole paper. They just need the main points. And so they get that from the abstract. Okay, so in the simplest term, an abstract is a brief one-paragraph summary of the main points of your paper. And when I say brief, I'm saying here about 250 words. They're usually between 200 to 300, or if it's a full-blown manuscript, about 3% of the manuscript. The abstracts help the reader to quickly assess the contents of the paper, and it helps them to decide if they want to read the entire paper or keep going. All right? So the abstract may be the second and final opportunity to recruit a reader to your paper, and then allow you to engage in information exchange, just like we did with so title is the first chance, abstract is second chance. This is the case because there are a lot of journals and a lot more journal articles. So I did a quick search the other day when I was putting this together. So as of a couple of days ago, there was over 40,000 plus journals. The number ranged from 40,000 all the way up to 70, 80,000, depending on the source. But for the purposes of this illustration, we're going to go with 40,000. Journals are published anywhere from quarterly, so 4 a year, to monthly, which is 12 a year. And they have about average, give or take 15 papers. So a little back of the envelope calculation, and we see that there's 2.4 to 7.2 million articles published annually. Well, who's got time to sort of read all of that? Okay, so we go to searchable databases to help ferret down the number. So January 3rd, I went to Google Scholar and I typed in fish, and I got 4.9 million hits. Too many to deal with. So I typed in fisheries management, and it helped a little bit, went down to 3.7 million results. Still too many. So I typed in largemouth bass, and I got 98,700. Boy, I see a mistake right there. Don't look at that extra zero in the 98,000. Okay, proofreading is important. All right, so 98,000. So when you're scanning this abstract, you got all of these results that you want to evaluate. You scan the abstract just like you scan the title, and you keep or discard the abstract that's relevant for you. And generally, the quality of the abstract determines whether the paper gets kept or whether it gets discarded. Okay, and oftentimes, well-written, informative abstracts, that means they contain a lot of information, are the ones that are kept, and poorly written, uninformative abstracts are the ones that are just kind of discarded. Nobody pays attention to them. Okay, so we've said this before, this is to reiterate. There's a whole lot of abstracts that are read comparison to the number of papers that are actually read based on those abstracts, right? So the abstracts has a much wider readership and a much more frequent readership than the actual paper. So the quality of your abstract matters to ensure that you're able to attract the audience you want for the information that you have to share. All right, so informative abstracts, they're clear, they're concise, they have simple language, and they're usually written in the past tense, right? What happened? They usually present some sort of background or problem statement in what your principal objectives of the study were. They include brief description of your major methods, whether it's a technique or statistical evaluation. There's a brief summary of your main points. And then it identifies the new information that you derive from the study, or the conclusions that are based on the study, and the implications from that conclusions. And then finally, it should stand alone without reference to the paper, because if you're trying to evaluate whether you want to read the paper, and you got to go to the paper to find out if you need to read it, then that defeats the purpose. So the abstract should stand alone without reference to the paper. So I'm going to give you an example, and if you will allow me a little grace here, I'll use one of mine. This is a master's thesis that this paper is based on a master's thesis that was done by Dara Mosley back in the mid 2000s. I don't give you the year or the reference because I'm not suggesting you go look at it. I'm just sharing this with you as an example of how you organize. The word count for this abstract was 250. We came in at 228, but I think you'll see that information content is high based on the organization. So the background, right? We said robust red horse, described by Cope in 1870, went basically unnoticed until it was rediscovered in the Oconee in 1991. Despite extensive surveys and decade-long restoration program, wild spawn juveniles have not been collected. So there's a missing life stage. And that's the problem state, that's the background and the problem statement. These fish are there. We can't find the little ones. We don't know if the population is collapsing because of lack of recruitment. So our methods. So we said that we experimentally evaluated habitat use by these juvenile red horse. We used experimental mesocosms to determine if juvenile red horse use a couple of flow classes based on their availability. It told us where we got the juveniles. They were pond reared. It told us the habitat types, eddies, slow flow, moderate flows, and backwaters. He said there were 4 trials conducted over 10 days. And there's all this information in here about the study. So this is very specific methods. The fish were used, pond reared fish were used per trial with replacement. And then we talk a little bit about what the analysis, log linear chi-square model was used to analyze the data. So that's all in the methods. The major results, we found that in the wintertime, the fish showed a preference for eddies and backwaters, and they avoided slow to moderate areas. And in the springtime, the fish showed a preference for eddies and avoided the moderate flow areas. All right, so a little bit about the results. Implications for the work is that currently people don't sample in those areas, and by sampling in those areas, they might improve the efficiency of capturing wild-caught robust red horse, which would address the problem that we're trying to address initially, right? So all the major parts of the organization are there and contains information. All right, so here's another example of a different abstract that does not have nearly as much information. So their background is very limited. And this is actually verbatim from the paper. The introductory sentences, this paper is an extension of a previous one concerning phytotoxicity tests of polluted waters. That's it, that's the background. Their methods said, now the procedures included are methods for evaluation of chromosome and genome mutations, period. That's their methods. The major results are very limited. They said, moreover, some relationships between the DNA content per nucleus, sequence of mitotic cycles, and grade of toxicity and amount of chromosome aberrations are discussed. Forecasting is where you talk about what you're going to talk about in the paper, but you don't actually say it in the abstract. And forecasting is particularly frustrating in abstracts because the reason you're going to an abstract is to know what's in the paper. And if they're only telling you what they're going to talk about instead of what they found, then you still have to go back to the paper to read to see what you're saying. And then there are explanations and implications. It says knowledge of these relationships enable us to make interpretations of the experimental results more accurate. I have no idea what that means. And this is an actual abstract taken from a journal. So if it were me, I would rate this abstract as uninformative. I read it and I have no idea what the paper is about, and I probably won't end up reading the paper. But if you think that's bad, take a look at this. This is a second one. There wasn't any background material. They just started out with the methods, and it said that the length-based relationships were analyzed for 3 fish species collected in the Beibu Gulf between October 12, 2012 and March 13, 2013. The study used bottom trawls with the 40-millimeter mesh size. That's it. That's their methods. Their major results were the parameters B varied from X to Y. That's it. And the major implications for their work are non-existent. This is an abstract from a paper in the Journal of Applied Ichthyology. Okay. That's even less informative than the previous one. So you have those sections, and you populate them with good information, and that'll make your abstract a little more effective, informative for your potential readers. All right, so how do you go about writing an abstract? Okay, so this might seem counterintuitive, but you don't begin writing the abstract until after the manuscript or the phase of the project that you're doing is completed, oftentimes when you're giving talks on incompleted work at a conference, the paper is not completed yet, but at least you have a clear message that you want to share. And it's only when you evaluate your data and you have your message clear that you start to write the abstract. Okay, so get a message clear. When you write initially, disregard the word count, right? So they might say you have 200 words or 250 words or 300 words. Don't worry about that at this point. You will later, but you just need to get the main ideas down. One strategy you can use to do that is to populate the various sections with 1 or 2 sentences from each of those sections in the paper. So you go to the intro and objectives and you get 1 or 2 sentences, put that in the intro objectives for the abstract. Do the same thing for the methods, same thing for results, discussions, implications. And by doing so, you have the framework for an abstract. Okay? Once you have all the parts that you want to say, then you go back and you check the abstract word count against the allowable word count, and then you evaluate it for brevity. Okay, so how many words do I have? How many am I allowed? Which word can I get rid of and not lose any content so I can come in under the word count? So that's what the next stage is. What can you delete without losing information content and allows you to reach your word count goal? All right, so that's your next task. That's not as daunting as it seems. So how do you delete words without losing content? Well, you do this. When you can, you should omit language that is needless and lengthy, unless, of course, those words are necessary. Well, that contains a lot of examples of unnecessary words, and we could revise that to read, omit useless or needless words. All right, so there's a clear demonstration of a whole bunch of words that are not necessary, and we went from about 10 or 15 words to 3, and without losing any content. So that's how you delete. All right, so you write your abstract, say what you want to say, and then evaluate it against your word count, and then start getting rid of stuff. So you're striving for word economy. I like this idea of word economy, and this is how I explain word economy. When we go to the grocery store or to wherever we buy whatever we want, we try to get as much product or commodity for as little money as possible, right? So I consider ideas here a commodity, and words are the currency that you use to transmit that commodity. So you don't want to spend 10 words to convey an idea when you can use 5 words to convey the idea without losing any content. So strive for word economy. Don't use more words than is necessary, just like you won't spend more money than is necessary to buy whatever the particular thing you're buying is. Okay. All right, so that's sort of the quick and dirty on preparing abstracts and strategies for that. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment, and I need to go back. Let's see here, share. The desktop window, demo, road, allow. Okay, so you have to tell me, Hunter, if you can see the entire screen.
Yes. Well, no, we can see the we can see your PowerPoint. It's not in presentation.
Okay, yeah, let me go back and do that. I don't do this often enough. Let's see here, stop sharing. Start sharing.
And the screen one instead of window.
Entire screen. And allow.
Okay, now we can see your screen. And so, yeah, once you go into presentation mode, you're there.
We good?
Yeah, we're good. We got let's say, 11 to 15 minutes if we want 5 to 10 minutes for questions.
Okay, we're in good shape. We're in good shape. All right, so we're all pretty much familiar with PowerPoint or other presentation software. I'm not going to belabor the point here, but there's some important considerations I want to share. And so this is just sort of some presentation basics and what I call general rules of the road. All right. So I'm going to be talking about my outline is so I'm going to be talking about outlines. Outlines are preferred, especially for longer talks like seminars. I'm going to talk a little bit about background choices, whether you use pictures or patterns or watermark, backgrounds native to the software. Talk about the selection of font style and size and color. Talk about font and background combinations with regard to contrast and readability, and then whether you should use animation and what type of animation and sequencing if you choose to. We're also going to talk about whether you should use pre-formatted templates or not. Talk about text to image balance and some tools in PowerPoint that help in making the presentation a little more easy to create. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is background. So a PowerPoint has just a whole bunch of native backgrounds, templates that you can use. All right, so I won't even go talk about those. But let's say you want to create a background based on some color gradient. And there are many options to do this. You can have the gradient go from top to bottom. As in the case here, it's light blue, it's dark blue on the top, and then it fades to gray, black or gray on the bottom. You can have it come in from the top, from the bottom, from the side, or from the middle in or sides in. Middle out, sides in. Right? This is what a gradient for one color looks like. You can also do gradients with two colors, right? So you pick two colors and the same rules apply. It can grade from top to bottom, from side to side, or from the middle out to the sides. Right? So this is a two-color gradient. This is a three-color gradient. And now this is getting a little busy, but just showing you what's available in the software as choices for background colors. Okay, I won't say anything more about this other than it's an option. If you don't want to go with colors, you can do textures. Again, there's a lot of textures that are native to PowerPoint or any other software. This one is a woven matte, is what this texture is called, and that's what I'm using in this presentation. But there are many others. You can use water droplets like this. You can use granite. I particularly don't care for this one, and I use it because I think it's particularly ugly. So just to say that, you know, there's all sorts of choices, and each thing is based on what each person's sensibilities are. So these are just three examples of different textures that you can use, and there are many more in the software. They have a bunch of patterns you can use. And so this pattern is called a sphere. If you use this pattern, you get to choose the foreground color and the background color. I personally find all of these patterns to be like seizure inducing. I don't care for them myself. The little dots look like they're moving to me, but I'm just showing you that this is an option. And so this is spheres, the little circles. These are zigzag. And if you stare at this long enough, it looks like it's moving. Again, I don't like these. This one is called shingles, like roof shingles, but they're there. Know that they're there. I don't like them, but that don't mean that you don't like them or might not like them, find them attractive. Just pointing out that they're there. We've all seen pictures used as background, and this is actually quite common. And you can get a picture off of your roll and just use it as a background instead of just a graphic in your presentation. It can become the background itself. And there are a lot of ways you can manipulate the picture. From the background, you can just have the raw picture as it is. You can do it in grayscale, where you get rid of some of the more vibrant colors. Or you can do what's called washout, where the picture is still there in the background, but you basically have a clear white template to work with. All right, so we're going to race through and talk about font types. There are two basic types of fonts: serif fonts and sans serif fonts. So if you remember your Latin, sans means without, so without serifs. So what's a serif? Serif are these little exaggerations on the ends of letters. So like the little dealie on the S here, or the little dealie on the F here, the little dealie on the T over here. Those are serif fonts. A lot of people say that sans serif fonts are preferred or recommended for presentations because they're supposedly easier to read. Frankly, I personally don't see the difference. I'm just sharing with you what conventional wisdom is regarding font selection in presentations. So here's a series of different fonts. Some are sans serif and some are serif fonts. They're all equally easy to read to me, but I should point out the two serif fonts so you can make a determination for yourself if there's really a big difference between readability of serif versus sans serif fonts. This is an important one. What size font to use? I've been frustrated many times when you go to a presentation and 3 rows back or 4 rows back from the screen, you can't read the slides because the font is too small. So you really must consider whether the font that you're using is visible from the back of the room, especially in a larger room. From my experience, the sweet spot for font size is about 28 to about 44. Much bigger than that, and then you have problems getting enough text in there, and then much smaller than that, and it becomes difficult to read. But you would have to evaluate, your content and figure out what font size works best for you. I just want to point out that you should be mindful about the folks in the back half of the room and whether they can see your content or not. Is the contrast visible? And so this has to do with the letters that you choose and the background colors that you're using. So here's that grayscale of those baby tarpon. We have black font, white font, yellow, blue, red, green, and gray. The gray almost entirely disappears. The green seems to be the most visible. Red is pretty good. The others have issues in various parts of their the sentence, for lack of a better word. So just be mindful that when you pick these backgrounds, consider what kind of font color you're going to use so that the contrast is good. What about animation? Animation is not required per se, but it can be helpful. And that utility, that it can be helpful, but it can be a distraction. It can be a distraction if the animation is constantly changing, especially if it's too dynamic, right? It's coming in from all sorts of places. And especially when you use sound with the animation. So I would suggest consider mild options for animation, things like where it just appears, or use blinds, and blinds can be vertical or horizontal. You could just expand, or it just fades in. And this animation also works for images as well. So here's a much younger version of myself that faded in, and then it just boxed out. All right. So you can also insert videos in your presentation. So here's a Happy New Year deal. All right. So you can do that in your presentation as well. That's an option in PowerPoint. All right. Text density. Text density has to do with how many lines of text are in a slide. And I would argue that about 3 to 5 lines of text are enough, allow you to have a large font. It doesn't overwhelm the reader. You can read it from the back of the room, and they don't have to struggle. They can very easily sort of grab the information that's there. And use of graphics, I find, help really well to break up the, having too much text. So go from something that's low text density like this to something like this. Now, don't read this. This is just to show you there's a lot of text here and you're overwhelmed with it, and it's not necessarily. The software has preset options. I personally don't like them because I think it limits your ability. So here we have a title box and a text box, and anything you do in those affect the other. And so instead, I would recommend choosing the blank option. If you use the blank option, you can put whatever you want, wherever you want, and you can move them independently without affecting the other thing. So blank options to me are more efficient. It allows me more flexibility in what I want to put. Some folks put section indicators in their presentation. It's not necessary, but it's a nice touch. So if you look here along the bottom, you see intro, methods, results, and discussion. And they could just sort of walk you through what section of the presentation you're in as you're going through the presentation, right? So there's a tool in PowerPoint called Draw tab. It has a lot of helpful. You can group things, you can align things vertically or horizontally. You can nudge things left to right, up and down. You can order stuff front to back, rotate or flip flop. Just kind of bringing that to your attention. We don't have time to go through all of those. Just letting you know that they're there. Okay, so there are a lot of options. If you make poor choices, I think it hampers your ability to share information, which is the purpose of the presentation. This is not a plug for PowerPoint, so I felt obligated to share that there are a whole lot of other presentation softwares besides PowerPoint. I just happen to use PowerPoint to demonstrate the option. All right, so thank you for your interest and attention. I'll be happy to entertain questions or comments. And if you don't feel like saying it today, maybe you're a little shy, my email address is at the bottom. Feel free to reach out to me with whatever question or comments that you have. All right, Mr. Hunter.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that, Dr. Jennings. That was great information. Certainly a good refresher that I could use after not having your class for several years now. So we'll open the floor up for some questions if anyone has any relating to any of the topics that Dr. Jennings discussed. This is your opportunity to pick Dr. Jennings' brain. While people are thinking about it, one that I kind of struggle with because I like using animations and slides is the overuse of animations, or the biggest concern with me is when animations don't perform like they're supposed to in PowerPoint, and I've had that happen a couple of times. So you may have touched on this, but what I found is it's a safer way for me to rather than actually using the animation tool than just to duplicate a slide and create that animation effect that I want in the next slide. That way I'm just advancing slides and it kind of looks like there's an animation going on, but there's really not. And so have you used that as a
I did. I actually used it in this presentation here today. Okay. And when we were talking about the terms of an act strap, and I had those little red boxes going down, those were just 5 different slides with the box moving from slide to slide. Because I too have had the issue where this was on my computer, so I felt comfortable that the animations would work. But when you put a presentation on a thumb drive and you go put it in somebody else's computer, and depending on the version of PowerPoint they have or how it's set up, the animations may not. I've had the same experience as you, where it doesn't work right. And so I, more often than not, will prefer to do what you suggest, which is to duplicate the slides and change the animation as appropriate. The only problem with that approach is that you end up with a butt ton of slides. So if I had done that throughout this presentation, there were a lot of animations here as well. And I said I was comfortable because the presentation was going to be running from my computer. But, if there are 50 slides in this one, they might have 75 or 80. Have we done duplicates to achieve all the animations that you saw here today?
Right. And 75 slides can seem daunting, especially if you're in like a 15 to 30 minute window. But
the other thing that happens too is, and this is a consideration, that if you have to email your PowerPoint to somebody, then the more slides you have with graphics, the bigger the file size, and there might be a limit as to how much your email server can send. And then you have to start airdropping or use Dropbox or other archiving files. And so, if you don't mind doing all of that, then I guess that's okay. But, to the extent that you can avoid that, then that would be helpful. So I generally use a mix of both.
Right. The economy of megabytes. Okay. Got one comment question here. What is the most chronic mistake you see in a presentation of scientific information, journal, presentation, or other?
Well, let me go to the journals first. The most common mistake I see is grammatical errors, poor sentence structure, and verbosity in papers. In presentations, the biggest mistake I see is too high a text density and overuse of animations. And some people think that, you know, I've seen presentations where they've used basically every animation in PowerPoint, and they think that's cute. But what ends up happening about the third or fourth slide in, when people realize that there's not a consistent animation, they stop paying attention to your message and they start concentrating on which animation is coming next.
Those are both really good points for papers and presentations alike. Adam Fox has a question. What's your opinion of scientific names of species and titles of papers? What's your opinion of that?
I don't think that there's a strict prohibition. I think if it's relevant to the paper, then it's appropriate. So I think it's situation dependent. You know, if you know, I did a lot of work with an endangered species where the name of that species was relevant to the paper. One of my most highly cited publication has the name of the species in the title. My third most highest cited publication also has the name of the species in the title. My second most cited publication does not. So it depends on context and relevance of the name being in the title to the contents of the paper.
Great point. Do we have any other questions for Dr. Jennings? He did a great job. What's that?
Or commentary.
Comments?
Feel free to disagree.
I was going to say you did a great job of covering, you know, 3 pretty broad topics in less than 50 minutes because we got started a little late. So
yeah, well, thank you. I spent the last 3 or 4 days omitting unnecessary stuff.
Well, that was really great, and a great reminder ahead of the abstract submission deadline for Georgia AFS, which, as a reminder, is January 16th. So everyone who's planning on submitting an abstract, just keep that deadline in mind. Don't you know, inherently plan on an extension, although that's not uncommon. So we will, if there's no other questions or comments, there's a lot of thanks to Cecil, and I'll repeat that. Then we'll close up here. We're going to have this recording posted on the website for future reference. So as you're putting your abstracts or presentations together and you weren't taking notes, this hopefully will soon become available for everyone to review. And thanks again to Cecil for your time. We appreciate it.
Sure thing. Appreciate the invitation. Thanks for having me. Thanks again for your interest and attention. Good luck with your abstracts and presentations.
Everyone have a great day.
All right,
we'll see you at Georgia AFS.